September 8, 1939, Poland. The Ciepelw Massacre would mark the beginning of a recurring mechanism in World War II for German forces. It is known that anti-Semitism was a motor that led the Third Reich to commit countless atrocities inside and outside the field of war. Polish civilians and forces, who had no chance of victory against the invading troops, were the first victims during the fierce Nazi onslaught in their unstoppable advance. Even the leaders of the terrible Red Army, which would almost simultaneously invade Poland from the east, would be horrified years later when the actions of the forces under Adolf Hitler's command came to light. So, do you want to know the context and details of the Ciepelw Massacre, one of the bloodiest events of World War II? Poland, located in Central Eastern Europe, was the first of many territories to bear firsthand the cruel attacks of the German forces. In a quick chronology, it should be noted that on August 23, 1939, the foreign ministers of Germany and the Soviet Union met in Moscow, where they signed a mutual non-aggression pact. The treaty sowed confusion in Western forces, given the well-known tensions that kept the two signatories in permanent dispute. 2 days later, alerted by the emerging situation, Poland and the United Kingdom signed another alliance agreement, which guaranteed mutual collaboration in the event of a German military invasion. On August 31, a series of false flag operations were launched on the border separating Germany from Poland. At first, they were attributed to Polish army troops who were supposedly surrendering and giving free passage to the German squads, but it was later revealed that they were dirty tricks by the intelligence wing of the SS. Thus, the German army entered its neighboring country in hasty and violent missions. On September 3, following the course of the Polish agreement, France and the United Kingdom finally declared war on Germany. And from that moment, every inhabitant of Polish soil, Jewish or not, feared for their life. With the Red Army looming over the eastern border, poised for an invasion supposed to protect them from Nazi forces, Poland was left with no escape. But in what context were the German forces preparing this unscrupulous advance? During the first days after the declaration of war, the execution of Polish prisoners and Jews was a systematically applied mechanism. The reasons were always far-fetched, and included a strong anti-Semitic character instilled in the troops years before through the Nazi propaganda ministry. However, when put into practice, they were extremely useful for the hasty intentions of the Third Reich in its blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Keeping the captured alive required men for surveillance and medical attention, in addition to basic supplies. But fundamentally it caused the loss of valuable time for the advance. Prisoners slowed down targets. Poland appealed to the patriotic sentiment of its inhabitants. Polish partisans, citizens and farmers whose houses were being razed one by the Germans, took sides for their lands, and offered to defend them in support of the weak army. A partisan is by definition an armed civilian, man, woman, or child, who is a member of a group precariously organized for combat, in this case, against an invading army. In counterpoint, the SS generals justified each massacre by saying that each of these rebels represented a potential threat. Manipulating the facts, they gave free rein to shoot entire families on the spot upon finding any object that could represent a weapon. Many of the Poles they came across were villagers, so it was not unusual to find a hunting rifle or some kind of forestry tool in their homes. This was reason enough for the German soldiers to make the cruelest decisions. But when they reached the town of Ciepelov, the situation got out of control. By September 8, clashes between the two sides had reached their peak in number and violence. In the Battle of Radom, the German 3 Battalion of the 15th Regiment, which was part of the 29th Motorized Infantry Division, moved along the Vistula River to block and occupy key bridges. On the Polish side, the 1st Battalion of the 74th Infantry Regiment of the 7th Division put up stiff resistance to this advance, intercepting the invaders on the outskirts of Ciepelov. Knowing the thick forests in the area, they confused and surrounded the motorized soldiers. This caused the first moment of real tension for the Nazi forces since the beginning of the invasion. For a few hours, there was an even firefight and hand-to-hand fighting. But finally, and before the arrival of the 1st SS reinforcements, the improvised resistance, made up of 450 soldiers and partisans, broke irreversibly. The vast majority were immediately seized, while only a few managed to hide and escape. The balance for the German motorized battalion was 14 deaths, which included the loss of the captain in charge, Mark von Lewinsky, at the hands of a sniper. Then, the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Walter Wessel, commander of the Nazi regiment, to assess the situation and the steps to follow, was imminent. Wessel arrived in a fit of fury at the deaths of his troops, and did not hesitate to take the cruel retaliation that turned a usual skirmish of war into an infamous massacre. More than 250 prisoners were told to undress and hand over their identity cards. In this capricious way, stripped of their names and uniforms, Wessel assumed that the soldiers would be considered Polish Jewish partisans, mixed in with the civilian detainees. A few moments later, they were shot by bursts of German machine guns. Their lifeless bodies were thrown into a ditch at the side of the road. According to testimonies of Nazi soldiers, the rest of the prisoners were transferred on foot to a nearby area, where more than 50 already reduced Poles were waiting. There they were shot by an SS armored vehicle. These dramatic events only came to light in 1950, when an anonymous envelope reached the Polish consulate based in Munich. It contained 2 photographs and notes detailing the massacre firsthand in a German eyewitness account that highlighted the anti-Semitic imprint of his superiors and many of his fellow soldiers. Later, around the 1970s, the Central Office of the German State Administration of Justice received a set of written evidence and recordings from the Polish Main Commission that investigated Nazi crimes. With Lieutenant Colonel Wessel killed in combat, the process was formally initiated, although against unknown individuals. Without yielding coherent or valid results among the surviving German soldiers, the investigation was suspended at the beginning of 1971. As a reward, the exhaustive collection of evidence by the Polish Main Commission achieved an honorable goal. 250 of the total number of prisoners shot with impunity in the Ciepelw Massacre were finally declared as soldiers killed in action. And now, we want to know your opinion. Do you think that the anti-Semitic character instilled in the German troops was decisive in the invasion of Poland? Leave your comment below. We also invite you to subscribe and activate notifications to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history. Thank you very much for joining us, and until the next video.